When someone goes missing, it often leads to search efforts that can span over hundreds of miles, and over state lines, or even across international borders. Every now and then, however, missing persons cases are solved after they're found closer than anyone had imagined. Number 5. On Wednesday, the 29th of June, 2010, neighbors of Rich Ringa, a resident of Lake Township in Ohio, were woken up to the sound of an explosion at about 3 a.m. They got up and looked outside to see what may have caused the blast, but couldn't see any fire and decided to go back to bed. At about 6:30 a.m., a friend of Rich, named Dave, traveled to Rich's home to pick him up for a court date that was scheduled for later that morning. Rich was expected to appear in Newton County Court on charges that he was operating while intoxicated, and had arranged for Dave to give him a ride there. When Dave arrived at the house, he stepped out of his car and was immediately aware of a strong smell of gas. After noticing that the west side of Rich's house had been all but demolished, he phoned 911. Lake Township Fire Department responded and found that the whole house had become unstable. After determining that the house was too unsafe to search as is, they called for assistance from District 1 Technical Rescue in Crown Point, who were able to provide equipment that stabilized the house to the point where they could search for Rich. In the meantime, Dave had been phoning Rich's cell phone continuously without getting a response. Once the house was finally searched, the man had still not been found, but one of the rescuers found a note on the second story addressed to Dave, saying that he would be spending the night at his mother's house. After calling off the search, Rich's mother was contacted and stated that he had, in fact, not been to her house after all. The search was started once again, but by 11:30, they'd still not located the man's body, and the Lake Township Assistant Chief, Jim Simmons, called for a cadaver dog to be brought to the scene, but the dog also found no trace of him. Then on the following morning, Rich's family members found him in a garage not too far from his house. He was taken to the local hospital where he was treated for minor burns after the explosion had melted his sweatshirt to the back of his head. An arrest warrant was then issued for Rich as he failed to appear in court, and he was handed over to police upon being discharged from the hospital. Number 4. Angelica Gayton, a 46-year-old woman from Puerto Colombia, was reported missing by her family in 2018. She suffered from mental health problems, which materialized after she'd suffered a heart attack. Her mental issues included a phobia of upmarket cars. Her daughter told a local newspaper that whenever she saw a high-end car, she would cower, screaming that they were coming to get her. The last time that they heard from her, she'd moved to Ecuador to live with her brother, claiming that she was a victim of domestic violence from her husband. In reality, she'd been living on the street for 2 years until she found accommodation at a crisis shelter. Then in 2020, after finding out that Angelica's husband was in fact not living in the city, shelter staff told her that she would have to leave as she was not in any danger from her abuser. Upon learning that she would once again be homeless, she took a bus to the beach where she spent some time staring at the sky. She decided that she wanted to end her life and proceeded to enter the shark-infested waters. For at least 8 hours, she floated in the sea, surrendering to the current. 2 local fishermen were in the area at the time and told media that they spotted a log drifting in the sea, but as they approached, they realized that it was in fact a woman floating on her back with her eyes closed. The men pulled her onto the boat and found that she was unresponsive to their questions, only showing emotion once they gave her fresh water to drink. Once she was brought ashore, she was driven to the emergency department of a local hospital where she was found to be suffering from hypothermia. Angelica's family has refuted her claims that she was abused by her husband, as well as the claims that she was forced out of the shelter due to him leaving the city, as he had never lived there in the first place. In the end, she was seen floating in the ocean less than 1.2 miles from the shelter where she had been staying. Number 3. On the 9th of October 2019, the wife of 37-year-old Ryan Linneman from Lee's Summit reported him missing as he'd not returned home as scheduled. Police searched Linneman's 2004 Honda Accord, but after trying to locate the position of his cell phone, checking his credit card activity, checking a license plate reader database, and checking his social media for updates, they'd still not found him. Friends and family of Linneman's were interviewed for any information on his whereabouts, but this too proved to be fruitless. As the days went by, the chances of finding Linneman were slimming, and his family became increasingly worried. Then, 7 days after he had disappeared, a man who was riding his dirt bike stumbled upon the man's missing car. It turns out that Linneman had been driving along the I-470 just 7 minutes from his home, where he'd crashed into a sign and down a hill on the side of the interstate. The car continued through thick grass, up a dirt mound, and careened into a ravine where it came to a rest. At first, the man on the dirt bike thought it was just a car that had been abandoned there, but upon looking inside, he realized that someone was inside the vehicle. He assumed that Linneman had died in the crash and immediately phoned for help, but when police arrived, they realized that he was still breathing, but he'd suffered serious injuries during the crash. The spot where the car had come to a stop was covered in thick brush, and it would have been impossible for anyone driving to see the car from the highway. Police stated that due to the severity of his injuries, it was unlikely that Linneman had moved at all during the week that he'd spent in the ravine, and that if he had not been found in such a fortunate manner, it was likely that it would have been down there for a long time. Linneman was taken to the hospital in critical condition, and due to his injuries, he passed away 3 days later on October 19th. Number 2. On the 19th of January 2019, Olivia Ambrosia was having a few drinks in Hennessy's bar in Boston. At 11:08 p.m., surveillance footage shows her leaving Hennessy's, and she's spotted again at 11:37 p.m. walking on Union and North Streets, appearing to be intoxicated and having difficulty walking. At 11:38, she's once again captured on camera near North and Congress Streets, where 2 men were seen watching her. She stumbled across the street and was approached by the 2 men, and once she reached the other side, they began to follow her. 12 minutes later, she's seen on MBTA surveillance being guided by one of them, his arm wrapped around her while she struggled to walk. At 12:06 a.m., she's spotted by an eyewitness, as well as another camera, walking on Austin Street, still being guided by the man who is now alone with Olivia. They're seen one more time in the same state, captured by a home security system on Green Street. The following day, Olivia's sister tried to locate her with the use of the Find My iPhone app, which Olivia had installed on her phone. The results showed that her phone was in the area of Watford Way and Corey Street, just 13 minutes from her house. Police assembled a task force to search the area where her iPhone was located and showed residents in the area photos from the surveillance video. People in the area told them that the man in the photos resembled a man who was living in a nearby apartment, Victor Pena. One detective went to Boston Housing Authority to find more information on the tenant, while the other detectives retrieved a booking photo from a previous charge against Pena. During this time, it came to light that Olivia's phone had now been switched on and that she'd been messaging her mother. Police made their way to Pena's apartment, where they found that the door had a private lock installed, which was not allowed by the housing authority. A maintenance worker was sent to remove the lock, and in 20 minutes that they waited for him to arrive, police continuously knocked on the door with no response. After finally taking apart the lock on the door, they heard the sound of the lower locks on the door being unlocked, and the door was open, revealing Olivia was inside the apartment all along. Police handcuffed Pena after a struggle, and Olivia was taken to Massachusetts General Hospital, where she told investigators that Pena had taken her phone and would not let her leave the apartment. Pena underwent a 20-day psychological evaluation and was eventually ordered by a judge to remain in prison until his trial date. Number 1. Tanya Ryder's husband, Tom, became increasingly frustrated at the lack of effort by police to find his missing wife. He'd reported her missing on the 22nd of September 2007, after she'd not been seen since the 19th. On that day, she'd been working at a Fred Meyer department store where she was last seen leaving after her shift. Tanya also had another job where she delivered pizza at night, and Tom therefore wasn't sure that she was missing until 3 days later, after she was last seen. He contacted Bellevue police only to be told that the case was not in their jurisdiction and that he should contact King County Sheriff's Office. He did as instructed, but was told by the sheriff's office that the disappearance could not be treated as a missing persons case, as she'd left of her own free will. On the same day, he inquired if her cell phone signal could be traced to try to locate her, but there was no missing persons case, so this was denied. Police then mistakenly assumed that because there'd been activity on Tanya's bank accounts that she'd left voluntarily, only to be told by Tom that he had access to the account and that he'd used it to buy gas while searching for her. Tom then offered to take a polygraph test to clear himself, and this finally prompted police to treat the disappearance as a missing persons case. Once Tanya's cell phone signal was traced, it was found to be in an area about 5 miles from where she was last seen. A search was organized, and her car was found where it had been left on the side of the road and crashed into a ravine 20 feet from the road. The car had come to a rest on its side, and Tanya had spent 8 days in her overturned car. Most of her weight was on her seatbelt, and she had a broken collarbone and a dislocated shoulder, while just a few miles from home the entire time. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.